When I first moved into my quiet suburban neighborhood, I thought I had finally found the peace and privacy I had worked so hard for. I had purchased a few acres of land just outside the reach of the bustling city, a wide property lined with oak trees, a private driveway, and enough space to breathe without the constant interference of nosy neighbors. It was a dream come true until I met the Homeowners Association, or rather, its self-appointed queen bee. Karen, if you've never had the displeasure of meeting an HOA Karen, let me paint you a picture. She was the type of woman who thought the world revolved around her, that rules only applied to others, and that her word was law, no matter what the actual law said. She carried herself with the smugness of a small-town tyrant, waving her HOA authority around like a sword, and to her, my land was nothing more than an extension of her kingdom. At first, I brushed off her passive-aggressive comments about how community events could benefit from such a large open yard or how our neighborhood weddings deserve proper venues. I told her plainly my property was private, fenced, and not for rent or use by anyone but myself and my family. She didn't like hearing no, and with Karen, that was the beginning of all-out war. I figured the occasional spat would fizzle out like most neighbor disputes, but I severely underestimated her arrogance. Karen wasn't just entitled, was calculating. And when she set her sights on something, she didn't stop until she got it. I noticed subtle shifts in the weeks leading up to the incident, more cars slowing near my gate, strangers inspecting the land like it was theirs, and Karen whispering to her little circle of HOA loyalists during board meetings, casting glances in my direction. I thought it was just petty gossip, but I had no idea she was laying the groundwork for one of the most outrageous invasions of privacy I would ever experience: an uninvited, unapproved, 350-guest wedding on my land. And it was only the beginning of a showdown she never saw coming. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came on a Thursday morning when I noticed a crew of workers unloading equipment near the edge of my land. At first, I thought maybe they were contractors repairing utilities or landscaping for one of my neighbors, but when I walked over, I realized they were setting up rental chairs and decorative arcas in my property. I confronted them immediately, demanding to know who authorized this, and they casually told me that the HOA president, Karen, had given them permission. My blood boiled. Karen had no legal authority over my land, and she damn well knew it. I told the workers they were trespassing and needed to remove their things immediately, but they shrugged, saying they were already paid, and that the bride's mother insisted everything stay exactly as planned. The bride's mother. That's when it clicked. Karen had promised sue me irreparably a friend or family member that they could use my land as a wedding venue, without asking me, without permission, without paying a dime. I marched straight to house, and there she was, sipping coffee on her porch like she owned the world. When I demanded to know what she thought she was doing, she didn't even flinch. "Oh, don't be so selfish," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Your land is perfect for community use, and this wedding is important to our neighborhood. You should feel honored." She was hosting a 350-guest circus on my property, and she had the audacity to act like I was being unreasonable. I told her firmly that I did not consent, and if anything of theirs remained on my land by nightfall, I'd call the police. Her face twisted into that signature Karen scowl, the kind where you know she's plotting her next move. "Good luck stopping us," she sneered. And that was the moment I realized she had no intention of backing down. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate invasion. And if I wasn't careful, I was about to find myself hosting the wedding of the year against my will. By the next morning, my property looked less like private land and more like the set of a wedding magazine photoshoot. Giant tents were being erected on my lawn. Rows upon rows of chairs lined up under the oaks, and a catering truck had the audacity to park halfway up my driveway as though it was some kind of loading dock. I couldn't believe my eyes. I stormed over again and demanded they stop, but the crew, emboldened by Karen's so-called permission, brushed me off like I was the one trespassing. When I pulled out my phone to call the police, Karen appeared, out of nowhere, strutting up in her pastel sweater and oversized sunglasses like a dictator arriving at her coronation. She snatched the phone from my hand and hissed, "You're embarrassing yourself. Everyone in the community is excited for this event, and you're the only one being difficult. Do you really want to be the villain who ruins a bride's big day?" The sheer gall left me speechless for a second. Villain. She was staging a 350-person wedding on my land, without so much as asking permission, and somehow I was the bad guy. I reminded her loudly I thought this was private property, and that she had zero legal authority to commandeer it. Her response: "We voted on it in the HOA meeting. Majority rules. Democracy." Sweetie, that smug smirk nearly pushed me over the edge. I knew damn well that an HOA vote had no power over property ownership, but Karen lived in her own reality where rules bent to her will. I had half a mind to shut it down right then and there, but something inside me said to wait. Let her dig the hole deeper. Let her pile on the arrogance, the lies, and the entitlement, because when the payback came, it would be all the more satisfying. And trust me, I was already crafting the perfect plan to make sure her little wedding stunt would blow up in her face in ways she couldn't even imagine. That night, I sat in my office staring out the window at the flickering lights from the rented string lanterns already hanging across my property. My blood pressure was through the roof, but my mind was sharper than ever. If Karen wanted a war, she was going to get one, and I would make damn sure it was by the book. I pulled out every document I had on my property, including the deed, boundary surveys, and even the original HOA charter, just to remind myself that the HOA had no jurisdiction over my land. What I found was even more damning for Karen. Not only did the HOA's authority end at the edge of the main road, but according to county records, my land wasn't technically part of the subdivision she presided over. That meant she had absolutely zero legal standing to dictate what I did or didn't allow on my property. Armed with this knowledge, I spent the next morning making calls to the county zoning office, to the sheriff's department, and to a lawyer friend who specialized in property disputes. Each conversation ended the same way. They were shocked at Karen's audacity and assured me that I was well within my rights to shut it all down. But instead of pulling the plug immediately, I decided to let this setup continue. I wanted Karen to believe she had won, to think her manipulative charm and faux authority had steamrolled me into submission. Meanwhile, I quietly documented everything: photos of the tents, videos of the catering trucks, timestamps of when workers entered my land without permission. Every single piece of evidence would be my ammunition when it came time for payback. By the afternoon, I had compiled enough proof to bury her HOA reign of terror once and for all. And as I watched her parade around the property, barking orders at the staff like some kind of wedding planner, I couldn't help but smile. Let her dig her own grave. The deeper she went, the harder the fall would be when the hammer finally came down. The day of the wedding arrived, like a storm brewing on the horizon. From the crack of dawn, cars started flooding into the neighborhood, clogging up the cul-de-sac and spilling down the street as though a county fair had landed in the middle of suburbia. By mid-morning, my private driveway had turned into a valet line, complete with teenagers in matching polos directing traffic onto my lawn without so much as a word to me. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching as one entitled guest after another strutted across my yard in gowns and tuxedos, sipping champagne from crystal glasses like they were at some five-star resort. The audacity was staggering. These people didn't even question why the homeowner wasn't greeting them, why the so-called venue didn't have a name, or why they were trampling over clearly posted private property signs. Karen, of course, was in her element. Dressed in a blindingly white sundress and oversized hat, she acted like the queen of the event, hugging guests, pointing to the decorated tents, and loudly bragging about how the HOA community had secured such a beautiful, exclusive location. Not once did she mention me, the actual owner of the land she had commandeered. By noon, the chaos was unbearable. Generators hummed, catering staff hauled trays of food, kids ran wild across my garden, and a DJ was testing sound equipment loud enough to rattle the windows of my house. Every fiber of my being screamed to march down there and pull the plug, but I stayed calm, because what Karen and her entitled circus didn't realize was that I had already set everything in motion. The sheriff's department, the county zoning inspector, and even the fire marshal had all been notified. All I had to do was wait for the right moment. And as the bride began her dramatic entrance to the blaring sound of violins, I knew the show was about to reach its peak and its spectacular downfall. The timing couldn't have been more cinematic. Just as the bride stepped onto the aisle runner, a pristine white cloth laid across my freshly mowed lawn. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance. At first, guests craned their necks with mild curiosity, thinking maybe someone had gotten lost or there was an accident down the road. But then, 3 sheriff's cruisers, a county inspector's vehicle, and a fire marshal's truck rolled right up to my driveway, lights flashing, engines rumbling. The valet boys scattered like startled pigeons, dropping car keys and clipboards. In the grass, Karen's smug expression faltered for the first time as officers exited their vehicles, hands on their belts, scanning the scene. I didn't waste a second. I strode down the porch steps, deed and documents in hand, and walked directly to the lead sheriff. "This is my property," I said loud enough for the crowd to hear, "and these people are trespassing." The sheriff raised his eyebrows as I showed him the paperwork, and his gaze hardened as he looked back at the sea of tents, chairs, and entitled wedding guests. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Karen, "do you have any legal right to be here?" Karen, ever the performer, plastered on her fake smile and chirped, "Of course." The HOA voted, and everyone agreed this land would be perfect for community events. The sheriff cut her off immediately. "That's not how property law works. This land is privately owned. You have no authority here." The silence that fell over the crowd was almost delicious. Gasps rippled through the guests as they realized the grand venue they had been bragging about on Instagram was nothing more than a stolen backyard. Karen sputtered, her face turning red as she tried to spin some nonsense about community rights. But the fire marshal stepped in, pointing out that the tents didn't have permits. The catering setup violated multiple safety codes, and the gathering itself exceeded county limits for unapproved events. In an instant, the entire 350-guest wedding transformed from a glamorous affair into a legal disaster. And I stood there, arms folded, savoring every second as Karen's empire of arrogance began to crumble right in front of everyone. The chaos that followed was nothing short of glorious. The sheriff ordered the music cut immediately, and when the DJ hesitated, 2 deputies unplugged the equipment themselves, leaving the whole event in an awkward silence broken only by the murmurs of confused guests. The caterers, realizing their permits were invalid, began frantically packing up trays of half-prepared food, while the fire marshal barked orders about dismantling tents that posed a hazard. Guests clutched their champagne flutes and fanned themselves in the summer heat, whispering angrily about how they had been duped into attending a wedding on stolen land. The bride, in her $1,000 gown, broke into hysterics, screaming at Karen for ruining her big day, mascara streaking down her cheeks as her groom tried unsuccessfully to calm her. The groom's parents were livid, demanding to know why their money had gone into what was essentially an illegal squat party, and the bride's mother looked ready to faint as she clutched her pearls and muttered about social humiliation. But the star of the spectacle was Karen herself. Gone was her smug veneer. She was pacing, yelling at officers, pointing at me, insisting that I was being unreasonable and heartless. She tried every tactic in the entitled playbook, pleading, shouting, threatening lawsuits. The sheriff wasn't having any of it. "Ma'am, you are trespassing on private property with over 300 people," he said firmly. "This isn't negotiable. You need to vacate immediately." Watching her face collapse under the weight of her own arrogance was a moment I will never forget. The very people she had tried to impress the wedding party, the HOA board members, even her closest sycophants were now staring at her with disgust, realizing she had led them into one of the most humiliating scenes the neighborhood had ever witnessed. My land was finally being cleared, not by me lifting a finger, but by the law itself, dismantling her charade piece by piece. And as Karen stood there, powerless and exposed, I knew this was only the beginning of her reckoning. By the time the last car peeled out of my driveway and the final tent pole clattered into the back of a rental truck, Karen was standing alone, on the grass, her empire of arrogance reduced to trampled dirt and empty champagne flutes. But the real payback hadn't even hit yet. The sheriff issued her multiple citations for trespassing, disturbing the peace, and violating county ordinances, while the zoning inspector promised hefty fines for every unpermitted structure she had erected. The kicker, because she had signed the contracts with the caterers, the rental companies, and the vendors using her HOA title. All of the bills, tens of thousands of dollars, were now in her name, and when the vendors realized the event had been shut down illegally, they demanded immediate payment, which Karen couldn't possibly cover. Word spread like wildfire across the neighborhood and beyond. The great HOA queen had not only embarrassed herself but also bankrupted her reputation. Parents pulled their kids from her community events. Board members resigned in shame, and the bride's family threatened to sue her for every penny they lost on the wedding disaster. Within weeks, she was forced to step down as HOA president, her once loyal circle of followers scattering like rats from a sinking ship. As for me, my land was mine again, my peace restored, and my neighbors, many of whom had secretly despised Karen's iron fist rule, treated me like the local hero who had finally toppled the tyrant. Standing on my porch one quiet evening, looking out at my property finally free from her meddling, I couldn't help but smile. Karen had thought she could take over my land, my rights, my life. Instead, she lost everything. And the best part, I didn't have to lift a finger beyond defending what was already mine. Karma had done the heavy lifting, and it was swift, brutal, and utterly satisfying.